This is Thelma English again, and I'm bringing you American Lit Session 4 today. You have made it through 3 weeks so far, and I think you are up to par, working hard, doing a lot of reading, and I appreciate that. Let's open this class with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful to be able to legally home educate here in our state. I pray that you would bless all of the families who are represented here. I pray that you would bless all of the young women and men here, that you would bless them for the investment that they are making with reading and with hard work to complete these assignments. Father, help us to learn things that will make us better people, better Americans, better Christians, and help us to see your hand moving through American history and your hand influencing and inspiring American writers. Help us to understand the changes in worldview as they happened 10, 20 years at a time. Help us to end this class being better people and better able to represent you. Father, we pray that we would not waste a single minute. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, now and then I've got little cartoons up here because I like cartoons. Still working on my camera here, getting it all. So I'm not sure if you see me or not. Valley of Vision, you should have a volunteer reader chosen by now. And this is time for you to go ahead and pause your audio and have your volunteer read. Okay, let's get back again. Don't you love those devotions? That is one of those books that you should ask your parents for a copy for your birthday or for Christmas. They make it in cheap little paperback copies, and they make it in beautiful leather bound copies with a ribbon, kind of looks like a Bible. And these prayers never get old, never get old. Okay, we've got homework to turn in. Let's turn in our explication sheet. Let's see, turn in our explication sheet that is due today for Mary Rowlandson's captivity narrative. This is a picture again of Redemption Rock. And the text says, on this rock, 50 feet west of where the sign is posted, on this big rock, where two of my former students are sitting. In fact, that young lady is getting married this month. Upon the rock, 50 feet west of this spot, Mary Rowlandson, wife of the first minister of Lancaster, was redeemed from captivity under King Philip. And of course, King Philip is a Native American Indian king. The narrative of her experience is one of the classics of colonial literature, and now you have read it. I suppose there have been a few tears shed by some of you reading that captivity narrative. It really is a tearjerker. When you think of the clash of worldviews that is represented in this captivity narrative, it's incredible. Because Mary Rowlandson was accustomed to getting up in the morning, reading her Bible, probably privately, then probably reading it to her children, studying the word, perhaps studying their Greek and their Hebrew together. But certainly her family would have been studying the Bible together. And for her to be, and they would have celebrated the Sabbath every Sunday as a very serious day off. And then to be kidnapped by Native American Indians, especially Mohawks, who were quite vicious. They're back east, up north. So for those of us in Oregon, we tended to have more mellow tribes of Native American Indians here. But the Mohawks were known for their severity and their cruelness to their captives, as we read last week. So Mary Rowlandson, we don't know if she wrote down absolutely everything that happened, but we do understand that she certainly went through trials and turmoils, and the difference of a Native American Indian camp, which would move all the time to find water and hunt more animals to eat, following food and game, and then treating their captives so horribly. Now it's time for a quiz, and this quiz is just 11 questions. So each one is worth about 9 points. If you miss one question on the quiz, you have 91%. You can see that in your hand. Miss 2, 82%. And hopefully you can figure out the correct answer just by looking at the possibilities. Number one, for example, Mary Rowlandson was captured in what year? 1575. Well, that's before the Puritans even came to America in 1620 and 1630. 1775, that of course is almost the beginning of our war for independence. So if you don't know the date exactly, you ought to be able to figure the date by canceling out the options that simply are not true. Your teacher copy, your teacher has the copy that in some instances has page numbers, syllabus page numbers, and column numbers, so that if you think, well, I don't remember reading that, your teacher or parent can look it up and show it to you. Because if you don't know it now, you need to learn it. So whatever you get wrong on this quiz. So let's take a pause now and take your 11 question quiz. Okay, let's get going. The quiz was not bad at all, was it? 11 questions, that's not bad. Session 4, we're continuing with the theistic worldview, and we're looking at early Puritan life. You turned in your explication sheet already. You've done your multiple choice quiz. We're going to be looking at the Mayflower Compact in your syllabus, and that is on syllabus page 376. You can go ahead and be getting that out now. Syllabus page 376, and you have that as a handout. Your two handouts today, one is just the quiz, excuse me. One is just the quiz, the other is the Mayflower Compact questions. I realize that they are in your syllabus, but I also made it into a handout so that just to make it easier for you to complete this assignment. You are also reading Baxter's, Richard Baxter, another great Puritan, Directions for Hating Sin. Do you need directions to learn how to hate your sin and how to spend the day with God? These are really practical applications of his Puritan Christianity. So how to spend the day with God. And we'll see these in the syllabus pages 374 to 384. We're going to be examining the Mayflower Compact. This is really important. We have a 5-question assignment. The questions are on syllabus page 376, but I have made it a little bit clearer in the handout that you'll receive today. It is due next week, session 5. And not only are you answering the Mayflower Compact questions, but you're also writing your own version of how to spend the day with God. Now you don't have to write it from a Puritan point of view. Hopefully you are a theologically sound Christian. How to spend the day with God. Tell me, tell your mom, your teacher, the facilitator, or tell yourself, how is the best way to spend the day with God? Most of us wake up and spend the day with ourselves, and then we give God little bits and pieces. But you're going to pretend that you're a Puritan where you're extremely concerned about glorifying God with your every word, your every action, your every exchange with other people, with the natives, with other Puritans, with your wife or your husband, or your brother or your sister, or with God. The Puritans are living in a time when every pregnant woman faces possible death. Every day you face possible death. There are no antibiotics. If you step on something rusty and get an infection, if you end up with some type of really anything, any ailment that today we would be hospitalized for, ruptured spleen, ruptured appendix, so many things that can happen, especially when you're out there felling trees and making log cabins. Any internal injury could be the death of you. And it might be 3 days to 3 weeks to slowly die in a painful way. Every day could be your last. And so these people are accustomed to thinking about, I need to make every day count. Virtually all of these writers knew people, women and men and children, who did not survive age 3 or age 5 or age 20, or people that were men who were left alone with 5 children and no wife, or a brand new baby with no wife to care for the baby, or a woman with 4 children and all of a sudden she has no husband. They lived through the harsh realities. And I think that's why Charles Spurgeon is such a good writer for this day also. Now he's more than 100 years ago, but those of you who enjoy Charles Spurgeon, he has several different types of devotions, and his are awesome also because he lives in a time just at the cusp of things like antibiotics and surgeries, things like that. So he too is accustomed to continual loss. We are very spoiled. that we see very little loss. We experience very little loss. Most of you have never lost anyone that you love. A few of you probably have. But as you get older, you consistently, all the time, every now and then, you will lose someone that you love. Hopefully, they'll all be old, walking with the Lord and full of years. But that is not always the case. When we're born, God knows the numbers of our days, whether it be years or counted in days, weeks, or years. So you're going to write how to spend the day with God. You can tell yourself, if you were going to be an awesome Christian and you want to look back at the end of your life, what did I do every day? What should you do? Not that you do now, but what should you do? How should we then live? How to spend, that's a Francis Schaeffer's book title, How Should We Then Live? One of my favorite books, How to Spend the Day with God. And you're going to pick some categories. He has many categories. If you're grades 7 and 8, you'll have 5 categories. Grades 9 and 10 will have 7 categories. Grade 11 and 12, you'll have 9 categories. And that is minimum. I don't know how many words it takes. I suppose it would take about at least 25 or 30 words to explain how to do something, how to spend the day with God, maybe more than that, or perhaps more categories. This is your chance to tell yourself, to talk to yourself. Okay, kind of a cool assignment. Your Mayflower Compact assignment, this is due next week, also with your Baxter paper on how to spend the day with God. And take a look at syllabus page 376. That's where this document is. I have numbered my lines. You're going to research any words or phrases you don't understand so that you don't just misunderstand. Expect to write 10 to 25 words or more to answer each of these questions. Please use complete sentences and do add a cover sheet. Number 1, in what 2 presences is this document being signed? And it tells us in lines 6 and 7, doesn't it? I've only shown you 5 lines right here. Then, number 2, the signers promise to covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. What does it mean to covenant and combine? What will the civil body politic do from time to time? What do the signers say they need to, why do the signers say they need to do this? And I see the answer in lines 10 and 11. These are the numbers of the questions. The lines will be on the next couple of screens. What do the signers promise? And I see that in lines 11 and 12. So here is your assignment. Number 1, I just read through all 5 of these. In what 2 presences is this document being signed? And we will take a look at that. This is my copy. I know it's really messy, but I thought sometimes kids really kind of enjoy seeing my copy. You note that I made a few little notes. Mayflower Compact. This was written on the Mayflower, which came over in 1620. So the time is sometime in 1620. This has been referred to as the first American Constitution because they're making a covenant with one another, what they will do, how often will they get together, how will they make decisions, very much like our later Constitution, which of course is based on documents like this. It was later published in London in Mort's Relation in 1622. So let's read what they said. We only have 14 lines here. In the name of God, amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord, King James, by the grace of God, yes, that's the same King James who authorized the King James Bible in 1611, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc. Having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and of one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. This really does sound like our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, our Declaration where they promise on their sacred honor and all of that. Line 7, you're probably numbering yours right now if you got out syllabus page 374. You're probably numbering these lines right now, number 1 through 14, with your little pencil. Line 7, and combine ourselves into a civil body politic. you do need to know that that does address only all adult males, except indentured servants. So an indentured servant, if someone came over on the Mayflower and an older man, for example, in several instances, paid the way of a younger man, and the idea is that the younger man will work for him. The older man will pay his voyage over, and the younger man will work for him, I think maybe 7 years, and then he'll be free. And that way he'll already know how to work. And this happened several times on the Mayflower. If you didn't have enough money, you could do that. It's very much like a apprenticeship, like an electrical apprenticeship. You work with someone alongside someone else, and they get most of the benefit, and you get all the learning. So these are the lines, and let's look at number one in your assignment. Let's see. I think I have all the. I thought I had the printout right here. I do not. That's okay. So this is the first, but these are the line numbers I assigned to them. You can see all my little scratchy notes on the bottom of my page. These are all the people who signed the Mayflower Compact. And it's kind of cool because you can see I have little notes. Winslow returned to England in 1646 and died 1654 in the Caribbean. That's this particular Edward Winslow. John Carver was a governor. William Bradford was the next governor. Longfellow wrote a poem about John Alden, and one of my daughter-in-laws, Samuel Fuller, is their relative. And the people who died the first winter, their names are all crossed out. So you're not related to any of those people because, for example, Richard Bitteridge was the first to die at the settlement. At one time I researched every one of these people because it's so fascinating, and it's very easy to find this information on the internet. Richard Gardner died in England or else at sea. Nobody even knows. Edward Doughton was a troublemaker. He was in the colonies. He got into a sword fight. And let's see, Gilbert Winslow, you see there's more than one Winslow, died in England. And John Howland, let's see, John Tilley, he died, let's see, married and had 10 children. One guy is the guy who was washed over. John Howland is the guy that was washed over the Mayflower and almost drowned. Incredible that he survived. And let's see, I have students who are related to him, and there are whole books written that tell this part of the story, which is really cool. And I also found out that the ship's cabin, the Mayflower, the ship's cabin was 13 by 17 feet. So it's the size of a living room. 41 men signed that compact. So that's a pretty compact group signing this compact. 9 adult males did not sign. Some were hired seamen, some were too ill to sign. They actually couldn't sign because they were so ill. Now, reviewing the early American literature, we're going back to our structured notes right where we left off last week, because this is how we kind of learn the little details. As an introduction to the Mayflower Compact and Baxter's Directions for Hating Sin, we're going to read from William Bradford's journal again, Plymouth Plantation. This is a picture of my copy. This is Bradford's journal that he kept while he was governor of the Plymouth settlement. So Bradford's history of the Plymouth settlement. And it's fascinating reading. The print is big. It's really easy. The Mayflower Compact is in here. There are all types of things that are in here. If you've ever had a book that your grandma gave to you at Thanksgiving about Squanto, walking in and then to a settlement and they find out he speaks English and he helps them to survive that first winter. If you have a little picture book of that, where on earth did they get that information? They got it from Plymouth Plantation. A lot of the stories that you have heard have been rewritten, and then, or the guy, John Howland, who fell overboard, that's in Plymouth Plantation. That's how we have all of this history, which is really cool. If you don't have a copy, perhaps your library will. The Puritans have pretty much fallen out of favor. People think they were too judgmental, they were too harsh, a lot of the things that they say about us today. But it's fascinating reading. So I'm reading from chapter 9 in William Bradford's Plymouth Plantation. September 6th, and I'm jumping right into the middle of the story. These troubles being blown over, And now all being compact together in one ship, they put to sea again with a prosperous wind, which continued diverse, which means variously, diverse days together, which was some encouragement unto them. Yet according to the usual manner, many were afflicted with seasickness. And I may not omit here a special work of God's providence. There was a proud and very profane young man, one of the seamen of a lusty, and lusty in 1620 means healthy. You might read in 1620 era literature, even in Shakespeare, later 1600s, you'll know, late 1500s, early 1620s, you'll read a little bit about Shakespeare and he'll say, "Aye, that's a lusty babe." That means a baby that can really scream its little lungs out, and that means healthy. And so he says there was a proud and very profane young man, one of the seamen of a lusty, able body. So he really works out, he's really strong, which made him the more haughty. So he's also vain because maybe he works out and he's big and handsome. He would also be contemning the poor people in their sickness and cursing them daily with grievous execrations, and did not hesitate to tell them that he hoped to help to cast half of them overboard before they came to their journey ends, and to make merry with what they had. So he's boasting and saying, "I just can't wait till you guys die and I'll toss you over and I'll go through your stuff and take whatever I want." And if he were by any gently reproved, he would curse and swear most bitterly. But it pleased God, before they came half seas over, to smite this young man with a grievous disease, of which he died in a desperate manner, and so was himself the first that was thrown overboard. Thus his curses fell on his own head, and it was an astonishment to all his fellows, for they noted it to be the just hand of God upon him. After they had enjoyed fair winds and weather for a season, they were encountered many times with cross winds and met with many fierce storms, with which the ship was shrewdly shaken, and her upper works made very leaky, and one of the main beams in the midships was bowed and cracked, which put them in some fear that the ship could not be able to perform the voyage. So some of the chief of the company, perceiving the mariners to fear the sufficiency of the ship, as appeared by their mutterings, they entered into serious consultation with the captain and other officers of the ship to consider in time of the danger, and rather to return than to cast themselves into a desperate and inevitable peril. And truly there was a great distraction and difference of opinion amongst the mariners themselves. So what they want to do, fain would they do what could be done for their wages' sake. So they wanted to earn their wages. And if you might recognize this word fain from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, if you took Britlet, fain would they do what could be done for their wages' sake, being now half the seas over. And on the other hand, they were loath to hazard their lives too desperately. So they want to go all the way and earn all the money, but they don't want to die doing it. But in examining of all opinions, the captain and others affirmed they knew the ship to be strong and firm under the water line, and for the buckling of the main beam, there was a great iron screw the passengers brought out of Holland, which would raise the beam into his place. The which being done, the carpenter and the captain affirmed that with a post put under it, set firm in the lower deck, and other ways bound, he would make it sufficient. And as for the decks and upper works, they would caulk them as well as they could. And though with the working of the ship they would not long keep staunch, yet there would otherwise be no great danger if they did not overpress her with sails. So they committed themselves to the will of God and resolved to proceed. In sundry of these storms, the winds were so fierce and the seas so high as they could not bear a knot of sail, but were forced to hull for divers various days together. And in one of them, as they thus lay at Hull in a mighty storm, a lusty young man called John Howland, coming upon some occasion above the gratings, was, with a lurch of the ship, thrown into the sea. But it pleased God that he caught hold of the topsail halyards, which hung overboard and ran out at length. Yet he held his hold, although he was sundry fathoms, a fathom is 6 feet, so several fathoms, under water, till he was hauled up by the same rope to the surface of the water, and then with a boat hook and other means got into the ship again, and his life saved. And though he was something ill with it, yet he lived many years after and became a profitable member both of church and commonwealth. And as I told you, I've had at least 2 students who were related to John Howland. There's a special book about him. You could go to Amazon and look up Mayflower, John Howland, if you are related to him. In all this voyage there died but one of the passengers, which was William Button, a youth servant to Samuel Fuller, when they drew near the coast. But to omit other things, that I may be brief, after long beating at sea, they fell with that land which is called Cape Cod, the which being made, and certainly known to be it, they were not a little joyful. After some deliberation had amongst themselves and with the captain of the ship, they tacked about and resolved to stand for the southward, the wind and weather being fair, to find some place about Hudson's River for their habitation. But after they had sailed that course about half the day, they fell amongst dangerous shoals and roaring breakers, and that they were so far entangled there with as they conceived themselves in great danger, and the wind shrinking upon them withal, they resolved to bear up again for the Cape Cod, and thought themselves happy to get out of those dangers before night overtook them, as by God's providence they did. You see how every time something good happens, they say, as by God's providence. They give God the credit for that. And the next day they got into the Cape Harbor, where they rode in safety. A word or two by the way of this Cape, what we call Cape Cod. It was thus first named by Captain Gosnold and his company in 1602, and after by Captain Smith was called Cape James, but it retains the former name among seamen. Also that point, which first showed those dangerous shoals unto them, they called Point Care and Tucker's Terror. But the French and Dutch to this day call it Malabar, by reasons of those perilous shoals and the losses they have suffered there. Being thus arrived in a good harbor and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven, who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean and delivered them from all the perils and miseries thereof, again to set their feet on the firm and stable earth, their proper element. And now you see ellipsis, I'm skipping quite a bit. Ellipsis is usually a space, a dot, a space, a dot, a space, a dot, a space, 3 dots and 4 spaces. If the ellipsis takes place at the end of a sentence, then you have the period first, and that's why we have 4 dots here. You know that their proper element finishes a sentence, and then I skip a great section and continue. Being thus past the vast ocean and a sea of trouble before, while they were making their preparations, they had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses or much less towns to repair to seek for succor, for comfort. It is recorded in scriptures, this is recording from Acts 28:2, a mercy to the apostle and his shipwrecked company, that the barbarians showed them no small kindness in refreshing them, but these savage barbarians, when they met with them, as will after appear, were readier to fill their sides full of arrows than otherwise. So when Paul was shipwrecked in Acts chapter 28, you might remember that he had friendly people to take care of him. And these people are saying, when we landed, they were barbarians and it was not such a friendly welcome. And for the season, it was winter. And they that know the winters of that country, think of back east. In America, back east, the East Coast has very harsh winters. And they that know the winters of that country know them to be sharp and violent and subject to cruel and fierce storms, dangerous to travel to known places, much more to search an unknown coast. Besides, what could they see but a hideous and desolate wilderness, full of wild beasts and wild men? And what multitudes might there be of them that they knew not? Neither could they, as it were, go up to the top of Pisgah. And he's referencing Deuteronomy 34, so I'm letting you know. It's in brackets, so you know that Thelma English has added this here. He's referencing Deuteronomy 34, where they go and they get to view the promised land from Pisgah, from this high place. They don't have a place where they can do that. They can't go to a high place and see where they're at. To view from this wilderness a more goodly country to feed their hopes, for which way soever they turned their eyes, save upward to the heavens, they could have little solace or content in respect of any outward objects. So they don't see anything comforting for them. For summer being done, all things turned upon them with a weather-beaten face, and the whole country, full of woods and thickets, represented a wild and savage view. If they looked behind them, there was the mighty ocean which they had passed, and was now as a gulf to separate them from all the civil parts of the world. If it be said they had a ship to succor them, to succor is to take care of them, it is true. But what heard they daily from the captain and crew? That was speed. They should look out a place with their shallop, their little boat. They need to go find a place with their little boat where they would be at some near distance, for the season was such as he would not stir from hence till a safe harbor was discovered by them, where they would be, and he might go without danger. And that victuals consumed apace, but he must and would keep sufficient for themselves and their return. Yea, it was muttered by some that if they got not a place in time, they would turn them and their goods ashore and leave them. So the captain, who wanted to get here in the fall, has now got here in the early winter, and daily he just wants to head back home. And when he only has enough food to feed he and his men for their way back home, they may just dump all their stuff, not let them come back to the ship, and take their little boat daily and go look for a place to settle. So every day they take their shallop and they go look for a place to settle. And then they come back to the ship where it's safe to sleep. But he says, find a place, go find a place now, because we may just dump your stuff and take off. Let it also be considered what small hopes of supply and succor they left behind them in England, that might bear up their minds in this sad conditions and trials they were under, and they could not but be very small. It is true indeed, the affections and love of their brethren at Leyden was cordial and entire towards them, but they had little power to help them or themselves, and how the case stood between them and the merchants at their coming away hath already been declared in the previous chapter, which I did not read to you. What could now sustain them but the Spirit of God and his grace? May not and ought not the children of these fathers rightly say, our fathers were Englishmen, which came over this great ocean and were ready to perish in this wilderness, but they cried unto the Lord, and he heard their voice and looked on their adversity, etc. Let them therefore praise the Lord, because he is good and his mercies endure forever. That's right out of Psalm 136, I think. Yea, let them which have been redeemed of the Lord show how he hath delivered them from the hand of the oppressor. Those of you who are related to people who came over on the Mayflower, they're talking about you, the children of these fathers, that you will say, our fathers were Englishmen who came over on this great ocean ready to die, but God heard them and rescued them by his mercies and delivered them from the hand of the oppressors. This is a good time to talk about who your relatives are. Some of you know when your families came over. Many families came over. Only 102 people came on the Mayflower. Some came later in 1630. In the 1640s, hundreds of ships, or at least dozens, came over, bringing more and more people until they numbered in the thousands. Some of you can trace your roots back. Our family can trace at least part of the family to the 1640s. If your last name is Winslow, you go all the way back to the Mayflower. I believe there are 6 million or so Winslows now. It's very easy to do the research. Some of the houses are still standing. It's pretty cool research. So if you've never asked your parents, when did we come over? When did our first relatives come? If you were Norwegian, like my father's relatives, you went to either North or South Dakota. Different people groups settled different places because they all spoke the same language and had the same culture, and they wanted their kids to marry kids from their own place so that they would have the same ceremonies, cultures, religious practices, and things like that. But it's pretty cool. If you haven't ever asked your mom and dad, ask them tonight. How far back can you trace your family? When they wandered in the desert wilderness out of the way and found no city to dwell, both hungry and thirsty, their soul was overwhelmed in men. Let them confess before the Lord his loving kindness and his wonderful works before the sons of men. So that is for those of us. We can go back to 1640 and part of my family. I think my dad's family came over not till the 1930s or 40s, but my mother's part of the family came over in 1940. And you may be able to trace back that far. And they looked ahead and said the people who come will say, well, our fathers were born in England. You may, especially if you are, for example, if you're African American, maybe you're just really an American with dark skin and you know your people have been here forever, but maybe you can trace yourself all the way back to a time of slavery and know that you actually had slaves in your past. Or maybe you're Native American Indian. I have some of everything in my family. We are real American mutts. We have a little bit of absolutely everything in us, including a little bit of Native American Indian. Some of those who went into captivity came back and bore children, or a few chose to stay with the natives, especially those captured as little children who had no relatives, then sometimes stayed. That's the end of chapter 9 of William Bradford's journal, Plymouth Plantation. And it really is cool. Now I'm going to start paraphrasing rather than reading every word. So we're continuing on to chapter 10, and I am paraphrasing. Chapter 10 begins on November 11th. Let's see. Excuse me, I've got all types of notes here. Chapter 10 begins on November 11, 1620. In this chapter, they discover a harbor at New Plymouth. They send the shallop with 16 of their 53 men, well armed and under the charge of Captain Miles Standish. As soon as they set close to shore, they spied 5 or 6 persons coming toward them with a dog. They are savages who run back into the woods, followed by the English, who chase them inland and along the sands several miles. As night approaches, the English set up camp and a night watch. Now remember, this is half of their people and probably 2/3 of their men. The next day, they pursue the natives again and are injured in the thickets. They're wearing chainmail and armor, he tells us. Can you imagine? They're running through the forest in chainmail and armor in case they're attacked. They are desperately thirsty and find water. They come upon some cleared ground, a graveyard, and some large baskets of corn. And what do they need desperately? Food. They take part of the corn and buried the rest. And so, like the men of Eshcol in Numbers 13, they carried with, remember the spies who went and they brought back the giant food, carried with them of the fruits of the land and showed their brethren, at the which the rest were very glad and greatly encouraged. They repaid this 6 months later. This saved them from starvation. And this is how they spent November. I think it is interesting that they stole this corn from the natives, but they repaid them 6 months later. They tried to be as honorable as they could without starving to death. And that's how they spent November. Soon the ground was covered with typical New England snow. On the 6th of December, they again sent the shallop to the lower end of the bay. This is what we now call Cape Cod. They could see 10 or 12 natives busy on shore, so they set shore 5 or 10 miles further. They made a barricade of logs and tree boughs and set a night guard. This went on for days. One night, a hideous cry was heard. They suspected wolves. The following morning at 5, they arose for prayer and preparation. As they packed their boat, they debated whether to carry their guns back and forth or leave them by the boat. Only 4 men refused to part with their guns, carrying them back and forth each trip to load the shallop. When the Indians attacked, it was these 4 men who provided safety for the rest. And that's where you thank God for the 4 who said, no, we will keep our rifles with us. Not one man was hit, though arrows pierced their barricade and their coats, and they called the place the First Encounter. And you can still go visit that place. I have not been back east yet. Kids ask me that. I would love to see all of the American places, all of the American history. I've been to Europe 5 times, and I have not seen the East Coast of America. They called that place the First Encounter. On December 16, now the ship has been there a long time, very, very nervous about staying there. On December 16, though windy, they made harbor safely with the ship. By the 25th day of December, they had begun to erect the first building for common use. Imagine the situation. Over 100 people cut off from any government with a rebellion brewing. Only staunch determination would help the Pilgrims land and establish their colony. If they didn't work as a group, they could all die in the wilderness. The Pilgrim leaders realized that they needed a temporary government authority. Back home, such authority came from the king. Isolated as they were in America, it could only come from the people themselves. Aboard the Mayflower, by necessity, the Pilgrims and the strangers made a written agreement or compact among themselves. The Mayflower Compact was probably composed by William Brewster, who had a university education and was signed by nearly all the adult male colonists, including 2 of the indentured servants, and we know a few that were actually just too sick to come sign. The format of the Mayflower Compact is very similar to the written agreements used by the Pilgrims to establish their separatist churches in England and Holland. Under these agreements, the male adult members for the civil body politic, now we're talking about things that are on syllabus page 374, looking at the line numbers, the civil body politic, if you numbered those when I asked you to, or I suggested you did, line 7, civil body politic of each church decided how to worship God. They also elected their own ministers and other church officers. This pattern of self government served as a model for political self government in the Mayflower Compact. The Pilgrims of Plymouth in December 1620 had 53 adult males of 102 people. Yet the remarkable fact is that within 15 years, New England had taken over as the leading colony in North America. In 15 years, it'll be 1635. By 1636, they even have a seminary built and going. In their sense of priorities, they were far different from the profit-seeking individualists who went elsewhere. Their concern was to build a common culture and a united society. Examining the Mayflower Compact for hints at its worldview. So let's look and think. Be sure and research words and phrases that you don't understand. And look at syllabus page 376. You actually have a handout that is better prepared to help you examine and answer the first 5 questions. Okay, what do we see in this Mayflower Compact on page 376? Number 1, in what 2 presences is this document being signed? Look at lines 6 and 7. I'm sure you numbered them. Do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and of one another. So how are you going to tell me what 2 presences are present when they sign this document? And use full complete sentences, please. The Pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact in the presence of God and of all persons who are present. That's the answer to number 1. Number 2, the signers promise to covenant and combine themselves together into a civil body politic. What does it mean to covenant and combine? Line 7. It's the end of line 6 and then line 7. They, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. And you see as a footnote at the bottom of page 374, the civil body politic is all 53 adult males except indentured servants. So all the males is the civil body politic. What does it mean to covenant and combine? Would that not mean that all 53 of the men combine together and they make a covenant with one another for anything political that comes up, anything civil that comes up? What do we do with someone who steals food? What do we do with somebody who, I don't know, murders someone, something like that? Number 3, what will the civil body politic, now remember that's the adult males, what will the civil body politic do from time to time? So they don't know how often they're going to do it, but they know from time to time, what are they going to do? Lines 9 and 10 on syllabus page 374. And by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and audiences from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony. So what are they going to do from time to time? The civil body politic, from time to time, all of the men are going to get together and enact, they're going to constitute and frame just and equal laws, ordinances, they'll frame acts, constitutions, and offices. Some will have to be governor, somebody be, treasurer, I don't know, from time to time. So they don't know how often that they'll meet, but from time to time when the need arises, they will meet together. Number 4, why do the signers say they need to do this? And this is lines 10 and 11. From time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. So all 53 men signing this promise they will be obedient to this. Whatever the 53 decide, they will submit to this. And it's all for the general good of the colony. Number 5, what do the signers promise? Lines 11 and 12. Which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof we have hereunder subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the year of the reign of our sovereign Lord, King James of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland, the 54th, in the year of our Lord, 1620. So what will they promise to do in those lines? 11 and 12, they promise all due submission and obedience. And you can use quotes and say the signers, and then go to quotes, promise all due submission and obedience, end quote, to this compact that they are signing, to this covenant. You can call it a covenant. It's almost a constitution, isn't it? Those are your 5 questions. They're very easy to answer, but they're also extremely important to answer. Most people don't even realize that the Mayflower Compact exists. Most people don't realize that that pattern of covenant was already in force in other parts of the world, and that this was what they were going to do here. They're using their church constitutions as models and samples. You can't just all get off the boat and go every man for himself, or they're all going to die. And so they covenant together. And that's what Christians do still. We covenant together. We call it a church. If the world continues on the path it is in 2022 and everything gets worse and worse and worse, we as Christians have all covenanted together to help each other, to take care of one another, to the point of adopting other people's children. If someone cannot take care of their child, a Christian family who knows them or even is a stranger will adopt their child. Think of all the people you know who have adopted someone else's children, someone who could not care for their own child. Either they were not married, or they lost their husband, or they had addictions and then had babies and wanted a better life for their child than to live with addiction. All of the reasons, and that's what we do. We covenant together. We take care of one another. And think of what the women in your churches do for the other women in churches. Think what the guys do. Think what the guys do. If your dad breaks his back and the roof needs done, all the men of the church go over and work on the roof. That's really just an extension of this type of covenant. Ours is simply a silent covenant. We haven't written it down with each other at our churches because some of us church hop, go from place to place to place. But we still covenant with the body of Christ, and we help one another out. If you're a hairdresser and someone needs their hair done, I had someone come and do my hair when I had cancer. They did it with me almost laying down to try to make me more comfortable and make my hair not so knotted up in bed, because I had long hair and I couldn't sit up long enough to brush it. And someone who was a hairdresser came and did my hair so that I could lay in bed. And then another hairdresser, when my hair started falling out in big chunks, I went to a hairdresser and they refused to charge me for shaving my head. They did a beautiful job shaving it all off. And they weren't even Christians as far as I know. But this is how we survive. So Lord, help us to see this pattern as a Christian pattern, and one that works well for all of us as we covenant and combine with one another. That is your assignment. You're going to look at the Mayflower Compact. You have 5 questions in your assignment. It is due next week. And then you're going to write how to spend the day with God. Now, how do you spend the day with God? How do you spend the day with God? What kind of categories could you come up with? And this is where sometimes when I was recording classes in my home, I would take the microphone around from one student to the next and say, okay, collectively, we are going to say, we're going to teach ourselves how to spend the day with God. And I would go over to Mary and say, Mary, would you please add our first category? And if they really didn't know what to do or looked like they were going to cry, I'd say, well, what about time? Why don't you address time? How to spend the day with God. And the first category will be time. Now, what would be something that you would want to make sure you did in regards to time every day? You could even look up Bible verses that use the word time, or the way that we spend our time, and not wasting our time. And you could, if you do insert Bible verses, don't just put the citations, quote the whole verse. Put the whole verse there so that your reader doesn't have to look it up. Put the entire verse there, and then explicate a little about the verse, what that means for you personally. I pledge that I will spend time every day in my Bible, that I will spend time in fellowship with my siblings, perhaps especially those that you don't particularly normally spend time with or enjoy. Spend time trying to learn how to enjoy those people. Spend time with a mother or father, even if you need to be doing chores to spend time with them. Spend time washing the kitchen floor while your mother's cooking, or wash the table off so that you have a chance to speak with your mom or your dad while they're in the kitchen. uh, Time, address time as far as allotting perhaps time. Maybe you use a planner or a student planner and you want to purposefully spend your time, so that in the morning you purposefully have devotions, that you get up by an alarm, not just when your mom wakes you up, that you choose when to get up, and get up and have a personal devotion time before you ever go into the kitchen and get cranky about math and science. And that you will spend time to do your school well, and time with your family, and time to lift up your friends, time to volunteer at church, time to volunteer somewhere. And of course, volunteering could be an entire another category, where then you go into volunteering. How to spend the day with God? Volunteer. Volunteer to help my mother at home so that I learn how to be a good volunteer. If you volunteer how to wash the floor and then you never listen to how to do it best, and you say, well, I'm already washing the floor, you don't have to tell me to get in the corners, I know that. uh, Rather than say thank you, you can check it when I'm done and see if it's good enough. Volunteering, so that you go somewhere and you don't just do what you want to do. We went into a boys prison, my husband and I did, once a week for 8 years, and the boys prison in Woodburn, Oregon. And it really was a delightful volunteer. It was kind of an unusual place to go. And every now and then somebody had a really, really bad day and they got locked up and they didn't get to come out and be with us. We went on Tuesday nights, every Tuesday night for 8 years. And they were horrified if they got locked up on a Tuesday and didn't get to see us. We even started a little basic Greek class, and we had a Bible study class, and I would help some of the young boys who were doing school there. They have their own high school there, and I would help them with their papers, how to write a paper, how to do things like that. Volunteering has many different looks. It could be volunteering to help a grandparent. Perhaps you help your mother with a grandparent, a grandma or a grandpa. Perhaps you help with a sick sister, or you have someone who is handicapped in some way and you help with that person. But everyone always should be volunteering to do something, even if it's just volunteering to help your parents so that your parents can go volunteer. Perhaps you're too young to go volunteer and do something exciting, so you volunteer to watch the children at home while your mother and father go volunteer somewhere, or while your mom does and help your dad out or something like that. So, how to volunteer, how to spend the day with God. What other kind of categories would you have? Then I might ask the next student, David, okay, David, what category do you want to have? And David might want to say, well, how to spend the day with God. I'd like to talk about Bible study and tell myself, because that's what you're doing. You're typing it up. You could even make it a little booklet if you want to. And if you know how to print up in a booklet, turn it in, give it some illustrations. How to spend with the day with God, devotions, that every day of your life you will open God's word. Every day that you do not open God's word, you are open. You're just opening yourself to misunderstandings, to harsh words, to waste, whether it's wasting things or time, or wasting your energies. There are lots of waste that goes on because we do not plan ahead. And we could say devotion might be the first thing that you're going to do. I had a student write one time how to spend the day with God, and she had a category called waking up. Every day when you wake up, give thanks to God that you have woken up that morning. Give thanks to God that you are still alive and you are still here to spend the day with Him, and ask Him, how may I spend this day best today? And then, and depending on your age, ask a parent, how could I best spend my day today, Mom? Because part of learning how to obey God as an adult is learning how to obey a parent as a child, isn't it? If you're 15 and you like to order everything about your own day, you're done learning. If you're 15 and you're able to say to a parent, how should I spend this day? This is on my list of what I need to do. Do you have any suggestions? How should I best spend this day? And have a parent kind of help you through. Well, if you did the thing you don't like the most, if you did that first, it would probably make your entire day better. And then if you can make that a habit and get used to it, that would have been time very well spent, because that will set you up with a habit where you always do the thing that you don't like the most. You always do that first. We always did math first at our house when my boys were young. My boys are 35 and 42 this year, the year of 2022. And when they were young, we always did math first. It was the hardest for me to teach. And it was the most, I don't think it was the most difficult for them, but it was the most difficult to finish. And if you got behind in math, you couldn't do anything else. So, how to spend the day with God? What if you had a category also? I might perhaps ask Susan and say, Susan, what's your category? And she would say, school. How to spend the day with God concerning school. And what might she add? What type of ideas do you have that perhaps she should be doing with school? And I suppose that might be do your most hated subject, your least favored subject, if you don't like the word hate, complete my least favorite subject first. Get it out, find out what I'm supposed to do it, maybe go in my bedroom, close the door, make sure all electronic devices are turned off. Do not play music that has words, only play music that might help you get that subject done, perhaps that doesn't have words. Sometimes even praise and worship can get you distracted from doing something like math or science, and you just need music without words. You need guitar music or classical music or something like that, or no music. But I would go around the class, and I expect you to do that in just a few minutes, to stop and have each student in the class give a category, make up a category, how to spend the day with God. Remember, grades 7 and 8 are going to have at least 5 categories. Grades 9 and 10 will have at least 7 categories, and grades 11 and 12 will have at least 9 categories. And the number of sentences in each category, I don't care. Do use a concordance or use the internet. Go to Google and say Bible verses about spending time. And that way you will get some good Bible verses arranged. Be sure and print them complete, not just the references, and print them and then talk about them. And that will give you how to spend the day with God, your own copy that you can then use to teach yourself and think, I'm a pretty good teacher. Part of the time we fail. They say if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that also applies to spending the day with God. If you fail to plan, how will I include God in everything today? How will I include God in my chores? How will I include God with my family? How will I include God with my school? How will I include God while I'm on this field trip today? How will I include God at my job, raking or mowing the lawn for the neighbor next door? All of those things, how to spend the day with God. And I would like you to please go around the room now and have each student give an idea of their own of a category. And if someone else, after when they finish, you can ask if anyone else has to add to that. And if you would like, you could even record that. Kids could open their phones now and make audio recordings. And then you could use that to inspire yourselves later at home this week. So you have those 2 short assignments, both of them quite a bit of fun. Okay, bless the Lord. And if I can, I'm going to figure out how to turn this off. The Lord bless you. May you have a wonderful week. And I will see you next week, session 6.